let's go to the bad point. So what's your bad point, King T?
Right, so it's a bit of a weird time to make this my bad point.
I love it. Go for it.
I'm fully aware of that, but I genuinely want to talk about it because it's something that keeps coming up in my daily conversations about Counter-Strike. And I essentially need to rag on w0nderful a bit. Because, as I said, this is the worst time to do this. He has had one of his best events at EWC, put up a near MVP level performance. Wonderful. But over the course of 2024, he has been demonstrably, with numbers, but also to the eye, the most inconsistent AWPer in the top teams, and it's not even close. This man has had as many maps with a rating below 0.9 as he has over like 1.3.
Wow.
Okay. He has been that extreme in his variety. So I just wanted to point that out. I also think it's important to note that Na'Vi themselves have this massive boon. They have the best IGL coach combo probably in the scene in terms of developing game plans, util sets, and training them into their players. Because you see, everyone's able to actually execute at this really high level. But what they've lacked so desperately is firepower. And often the focus is, oh, well, JL kind of has to overperform from these spots, and Bit, we really need more out of Bit. And I feel like w0nderful in the general population gets too much of a pass, considering he is capable of being not just bad, but horrific in so many of these big maps. It's a problem that they need to resolve if they want to be consistently considered top and not have every single one of their event wins just be looked at as another fluke, because, hey, this one time, the firepower got itself together. But aside from that, looking pretty and potentially making playoffs isn't enough to be considered really the #1 team in the world.
w0nderful is just... the problem with w0nderful is that he passes the eye test in terms of how rapidly this dude flicks his mouse. But in terms of positioning himself to have impact, he is pretty consistently poor at it in terms of just binding fights. I feel like one of the reasons that when he first joined Spirit in the stead of Dexter, that they liked him so much is that he got out of the way. He was like the polar opposite of Dexter as a personality. He would just listen to the strategy that Chopper calls. He would throw the nades that they need him to, and he would just be a turret in the back lines, just holding for any CT that decides to peek through and execute that Spirit was throwing. And I feel like he kind of had a resurgence when he played with Sprout, started taking a little bit more initiative, but now he's kind of regressed back to sort of what he did with Spirit again, where he's not calling his own number nearly enough, and especially not on T sides. I don't feel like anything that he's doing, I don't know if they're probably not designing anything for him on the T side, but I don't think many teams in general design too much other than maybe, say, an opening pick for their operas on the T side right now. So I don't really... You're right. This is a really bad time to say this, because if you took purely what he did at EWC, it's like, what are you even talking about? But if you just chop off that event, which was a huge aberration, given that it was practically speaking his best event of the year, then it's been highs, really some decent highs, but some pretty low lows too. Like streakiness is definitely a concern for him, and I feel like it's like, I pitted Brokey against Torzy earlier in the year, and that kind of blew up for me. But again, I kind of do the same thing. It's like, at least with Torzy, I just know what I'm getting day in, day out. With Halzerk, I kind of know what I'm getting. I feel like w0nderful has so much more untapped potential, and it's about putting it to the right use, or putting it in the right spaces, or just taking a fight. Like instead of being the last man alive and trying to bail your team out of something, or just saving, he's not imposing himself nearly as much in the mid round as he probably could, and that's something where they definitely need to find more ways and opportunities for him to do that. I think his rifle's okay, but I would, honest to God, probably take Nikadaz's rifle over w0nderful's. So that's probably not the best sign either. And overall, I just for whatever reason, it's very odd that Blade hasn't found... I guess, you know what, now that I think about it, maybe it's not odd that Blade hasn't figured out how to use w0nderful perfectly, because he's so used to having somebody that was so autonomous, such as Simple, that he didn't really have to worry about that, and he was constructing more so a game plan for the riflers and the space takers on his team.
Yeah, there's a few things. I'll pick up on some of the things you guys said to say it. So first of all, I actually agree that even though it looks like the timing's the worst, King T, basically you've figured out the meta now of how I do it, which is I don't think up a contrarian take. I've told everyone this before. It's why I did that infamous Fallen tweet. Do you know the real reason people are upset about that Fallen tweet? A lot of people don't know the context. It's because if you ever go and look it up, I tweeted it like right after he like carried a game at a major as like a fucking 30-year-old boomer or something mental. Like, because like you're doing now, I actually think the real brave take is when everyone's going, this guy's amazing because he just had a glow up, is to go, actually, I've got to say, I think he's overrated and not that good. And here's the reason why. And essentially, look, it's not going to play well unless you want to have like controversy and discussion, blah, 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 etc. But I do think essentially it's the ultimate courage to say, like, I actually don't think that person's that good. In the same way as to say you think they're a fluke's not that good. You just won the fucking event. Obviously, people are going to rag on you and go, you idiot, you just won the event. And obviously, this particular event, I actually think is a perfect example, though, King T. Because on the one hand, nobody said this because nowadays everyone does value the final a lot. If you look at stats, this guy, after the Bit Nico conversation, is the most obvious next MVP of the tournament. He had amazing numbers for the whole event, but I'll tell you what, he didn't do a whole lot in that final. And in fact, you know that other final, everyone brags, hey, they've made 2 finals now, Thorin. He did fuck all in that Spirit final too. So I think actually, even his big performances show what King T's saying. Because think about this, when I give you this framing, I think even a moron will see that they've actually looked at Wonderful the wrong way. Which is, I'll give 2 parts. So one, I'll actually defend Maniac. Maniac always says the opposite. He thinks Wonderful is underrated. I actually know what he means by that, because I've just talked to Maniac enough. I know how he thinks about CS. He means not in the sense that Wonderful's anywhere near Modessy's level. What he means is if you look how Na'Vi plays, bro, they would never make a single final without Wonderful. Like, he's like the backbone of their system. In fact, I do think, in some ways, to play into what Maui said, I do think Blade actually probably somewhat likes the way he plays. He plays just a very boring, simplistic, predictable style. But I'll tell you what, I'll bet you're able to fucking gameplay around that. If you're Lexi B, you know exactly where this guy's going to be, you know what angle he's watching, you know what he's doing. You don't know that, by the way, with the Dexter, with the Modesty, with the... You have no idea. I also agree with that final point there. So here's the point I would make. If you agree with Maniac, as I would, that the best player on Na'Vi is Wonderful, well then explain this to me, guys, fans of majors not being flukes. If these tournaments aren't flukes, well then you actually have to say, you would on placing anyway, that Na'Vi's the team of the year so far. So let's just follow the logic. If Wonderful is the best player using the best gun on the best team of the year, why does not a single human being have him in their top 5 players in the world? Right, have you finished thinking out? Because you know he's not actually that sick. You know that no matter what the stats tell you, this guy isn't actually enough of a beast. It's why I've always said, I'll give it a contrast point again, because he just won this event. I always thought that actually that shows to me that Spirit had no fucking clue what they were talking about with Dexter. Because they did seem to like Wonderful more. And I remember watching and going, Wonderful's pretty good, but he's just a worse version of Dexter without the autonomy. Like, the autonomy they don't like is what I like about Dexter. I like the idea he calls his own number because he's going to hit a home run, you dickhead. Get out of his way, you guy who doesn't know how the AWP works. Let him call his number and he will get kills, and he has proven he will do that. I think that's actually I agree with what you said as well, Maui. If you've had Simple... The reason Simple's entire career is the whole scene telling him, be less toxic, be less selfish, is because he's the ultimate alpha male, isn't he? He's the guy who's always calling the joke about him is he doesn't even know he has the green light. He wasn't even aware there was a light system. He's just taking every shot he wants. It's actually one of the reasons why he's probably not in the team right now, because everyone knows, like, essentially... He's like fucking Thanos. Like, the whole universe changes when this guy comes in your team. Like, you better be prepared for it. You can't just go, hey, Simple, we're just going to integrate you. You're just going to, like, call these players. Like, he's Peyton Manning. He calls his own players motherfucking. In fact, he turns off the mic before the shot clock ends, you know, like. So I think the problem you have there, I agree, Maui, is when you've had the ultimate agency AWPer, it's going to be hard to take an AWPer, because I'm going to say this as well. I'm going to psychologically speculate. I don't think it's the case that Wonderful is from the Shiro James school of like passive / really defensive AWPing. I think they do that because that is how they think CS should be played. I think if you watch how Wonderful plays, I do think he either thinks he can't call his own number in this analogy, Maui, and he has to like stick to the system, or I actually think he sometimes just doesn't have the confidence to. If you ever read his interviews, he doesn't come off as arrogant at all. In fact, the opposite. He has been overly self-effacing, in my opinion. If you look at his interviews about the idea he could never be in Na'Vi because of simple and modesty, or some of the other things he said, he actually seems incredibly humble as a player. And I have to say, if I want him to be the player he probably could be, I'd want to pump that up a bit. It's a bit like the Zero thing. Let me get in this with this guy in a room. I'll have him coming out being the most egotistical cunt of all time. I want that. I want it to be a bit spicier, because I do think this guy could actually be better. I think he's got like a fifth gear he doesn't kick into that often now. Because in my opinion, as my classic way of saying it, this guy's problem is he lets the game come to him, but that's not what the greatest players in the world do. The greatest players in the world, go look at like Donk, Monesi, they make the game come to them. They force the game their way, whether they're playing well or not, whether they're getting the gun or not, whether the other team's awesome or not. That's what makes them the greatest players, the transcendent players. And then I'll just say, finally, the one problem I also have is this, which is, when you look at his stats and you look at just the eye test of like his highlight rounds, you will see this guy could be like the fifth best player in the world. But I do think this, like how he works in Na'Vi and how he seems to make his decisions, that will actually hold him back. He actually reminds me, by the way, in that sense, of Device back in the day, where I always told people, like, by the way, Device at this point has gotten the Get Right rap, where because you compare Device to Simple and you compare Get Right to Forest, people start talking like they don't have skills and that they're a 5. No, I'm saying if Forest's a 10 out of 10, Get Right was just a 9 out of 10. You know what I mean? So let's not pretend Device isn't insanely skilled at CS. He just wasn't Simple and never tried to play that way. But you saw the difference between Device, who was like second guessing himself, and Device, who was just locked in. It was the same player skill-wise, but there's a massive difference in terms of impact. So, no, I actually agree. I think what's weird is, if you want to look at how Na'Vi's constructed, I actually think Wonderful doesn't get enough props. I think people do over-focus on big global performances from JL and fucking Bit for obvious reasons, or they just focus on hating Immer. So I actually do think Wonderful's the best player in the team, but spoiler, this all loops back. This is why I actually don't think Na'Vi's the true number one. Like, if you look at how we evaluate number ones, we do it on placings. So on placings, they have to be number one. But if you're talking spiritually, like if you watch the game, essentially, here's the question. If I put a gun to your head and said, which team do you want to represent you in a match? And if you lose, you die. I don't think any of you motherfuckers are picking Na'Vi, including Na'Vi players. There you go. How about that? You know what? Spirit might not have won. I think I'll take Spirit or, like, you know what I mean? Or fucking Vitality. I'll take them over this Na'Vi squad, boys. See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.